Hello and welcome to another TLDR global video. Not long ago, we put out a video where we discussed some of the factors which are leading to global fertility rates to drop, and interestingly, penises to shrink. Anyway, that video is linked in the description, and today we're going to look specifically at which countries have falling populations, why it's happening, why it's a problem, and what countries are doing to better counter the decline. Before we start, about 83% of our viewers aren't subscribed, and subscribing not only helps us out, but it also ensures that you get more content from us on topics like fertility and penis size, the situation in Israel, ongoing wars around the world, or China's controversial Olympics. Hit subscribe and ring the bell icon to get all of that and more. Thanks so much for your support. So let's start with which countries are seeing their populations decline. According to UN data, 21 countries saw their population decline from 2015 to 2020. In order of slowest decline to fastest, we have Italy, Albania, Poland, Georgia, Moldova, Andorra, Japan, Hungary, Serbia, Portugal, Greece, Ukraine, Syria, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Venezuela, Latvia, Lithuania and Puerto Rico. And there's a pretty significant difference between the countries at the top and the bottom of this list, with Italy only shrinking by 0.04% between 2015 and 2020, compared to Puerto Rico's more significant 3.34% drop. But this list really understates how many countries are in trouble. In most of the developed world, fertility rate, that is the number of births per woman, have fallen below the replacement rate of 2.1. A fertility rate of 2.1 guarantees a stable population size. Anything lower, and without immigration or dramatic increases in life expectancy, your population will start to shrink. The US and UK, for example, both have fertility rates of about 1.7. The EU's average is 1.5, and in developed Asian nations, the numbers are even worse. Japan has a fertility rate of just about 1.4, Singapore a measly 1.1, and South Korea the lowest in the world, of just 1. Now, while not every country with a birth rate below 2.1 is in decline yet, many expect that we'll see their populations shrink in the near future. The UN, for example, predicts that Europe's population will start to shrink in about 2040, and as we'll explain in a bit, it might actually end up starting even sooner. So why is all of this happening? Well, there are basically 3 good predictors of fertility rate, and all of them fall as countries develop. The first predictor is urbanization. On a farm, a child is a useful labourer, and housing is cheap. In the city, there's less labour for children to do, and housing is much more expensive. So as populations urbanise, their birth rates fall. The second predictor is women's education, and gender equality more generally. Basically, the better educated a woman is, the less likely she is to have children, in part because children still aren't great for careers. The third predictor is religion. Basically, the more religious a society is, the higher their fertility rate. 3 Gallup polls taken in 2008, 2009 and 2015 asked respondents whether they felt religious or not. In Niger, which has the highest fertility rate at 6.9, 99% of those polled answered yes. At the other end, in Spain, which has the lowest birth rate in Europe at 1.3, only 39% said yes, making it one of the least religious countries in the world. Interestingly, societies where the power of the Catholic Church has rapidly collapsed, such as Spain, Quebec, and Ireland, tend to go from having relatively high to relatively low fertility rates, especially quickly. Basically, as countries develop, they become more urban, more equal, and less religious, all of which mean fewer children. So what does this mean? Well, low fertility rates are economically and politically disastrous. Basically, low fertility rates mean a smaller and, importantly, older population. Basically, this means that there will be fewer people of a working age relative to pensioners, which means a smaller economically productive population sustaining a relatively larger non-productive population. A good metric of this is the old age dependency ratio. Basically, the number of working people per pensioner. Globally, it's about 6.3 today. By 2050, it's expected to fall to 4.3, and by 2100 to 2.4. That means today the taxes of 6 young people pay for the public services of each one old person, their health costs, palliative care costs, etc., etc. And by 2100, 2 working age people. Standard economic theory will tell you that this means lower quality of services, and it's already happened in Europe. The old age dependency ratio has gone from about 5 in 1997 to 3 in 2017. So how can we stop this? Well, there are 2 obvious ways to maintain the quality of services: tax young people more or increase the retirement age. Obviously, no politician wants to do either of these things, so they tend to do something else: try and encourage people to have children by using so-called pronatalist policies, usually stuff like paid child leave, child benefits, and other tax incentives. Today, the UN estimates that about 30% of countries have explicitly pronatalist policies, up from just 10% in the 70s, including a government-sponsored dating agency in Singapore. The problem is that these policies don't usually make that much of a difference. Sweden, for example, has arguably the most parent-friendly tax system in the world. You get 480 days of paid parental leave, most of it at 80% of full earnings, with both parents forced to take a minimum of 60 days each. And child benefit is about €130 per child per month, increasing with each child. And yet, Sweden's fertility rate has fallen from 2.1 in 1990 to 1.66 in 2020. Now, Sweden's fertility rate is still higher than most other developed countries, and was as high as 1.9 in 2013, but it's not a massive difference, especially when you consider how expensive these policies are. Part of the problem is that once you've had a generation of low birth rates, then it's hard to increase them again. Small families become the norm, and infrastructure like schools shrink in anticipation of fewer young people. There is another way of maintaining your population though, and that's immigration. Even if your native-born population is aging and declining, you can maintain your population by bringing in younger immigrants. This is something that Canada have been doing for years. Canada's fertility rate is a measly 1.5, but they accept 300,000 immigrants a year, more per capita than basically any other developed nation. For comparison, the UK accepts similar numbers of immigrants each year, but the total population is about twice as large. Canadian immigrants are on average 7 years younger than native-born Canadians too, which means that Canada's population will age slower than other, less immigration-friendly developed nations. Canada's immigration system is generally super interesting. Immigrants are on average better educated than native-born Canadians. A large fraction of them are privately sponsored, and only 10% are refugees, but that's an entirely separate video. And it's worth saying that this immigration thing is bad news for Asian countries like China and Japan, who take in far fewer immigrants than their Western counterparts. And let's talk about China for a second. China's official fertility rate is about 1.6, but there's some dispute around this. A 2010 census implied that it was actually 1.2, and a 2016 survey by the Chinese State Statistics Bureau cited it as low as 1.05. China also has 120 boys for every 100 girls. Both of these figures are a consequence of China's one-child policy, which was only abandoned in 2016, and poses a massive demographic problem for China. China's working population has been shrinking since 2011, and the Financial Times reported that, according to leaked census data, China's population actually shrunk in 2020. Now, while China's official data disputes this, they released this data suspiciously late, and even the official data admits that population growth is slowing. It's especially a problem for China because China just doesn't do immigration. In 2016, China issued just 1,576 permanent residency cards. Basically, China has a real demography problem, and there's no obvious answer. What do you think about this whole problem, though? Is your country facing population decline? And if it is, what do you think the solution is? Should they be encouraging more births, more migrants, or do you just not think it's a major problem? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.